Hey everybody, and happy Friday to you. In this saga of the Las Vegas Stadium Authority and its collection of revenues from the room tax, the stadium hotel tax of 88/100%, we have this new news, and it goes like this. Christmas Day of last year, 2017, I reported that at that time that the room tax revenue, the stadium hotel tax revenue from the tax that was imposed by the Nevada Legislature and with the approval of Clark County, the 88/100% rate, brought in its lowest revenue figure to date at that time in the brief, short life of the collection of monies from the tax. That was approximately $3.2 million, or if you like, it was really not $3.2 million, it was $3.3 million, $3,363,667. $3.3 million. Or if you want to round it up, $3.4 million. Regardless, it came out to be a deficit. Less. And we waited with bated breath to find out and ask, what's December going to look like? And now we know. Thanks to a tweet put out by Clark County Chairman Steve Hill yesterday, late yesterday, the December figure for the collection of revenue from the stadium tax is $2,633,175. That's $2.6 million, and that is less than the $3.3 million that I reported on Christmas Day. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with this. To cut to the chase, if the bond issue were floated today, there would not be enough money collected on a monthly basis to retire the bond debt associated with a $700 million, let alone $750 million series of bonds over 30 years and just a 4% rate of interest. If you add the debt coverage ratio of 1.5 to 1. You see, this is how it works. A bond underwriter is going to want the appropriate insurance that you have enough money left, a cushion between the debt to pay on a bond, which is kind of a loan, right? And what your total money taking in is. So let's say, okay, in this instance, normally it's 2 to 1. But in this instance, because of the use of the Clark County General Fund, the designers of the bond issue were able to, consultants of the Las Vegas Stadium Authority, were able to get a 1.5 to 1 debt coverage ratio, believing that such a small, hurdle rate, small total number needed to come up with monthly revenues would be fine. It's not fine. It's not fine at all. And the reason is because the 88/100% rate is too low. It is too low. Now, you would ask the question, okay, what's the Las Vegas Stadium Authority's take on this? Well, let's go back in history. April 15th, 2017, I was the first and only media person to sound the call that there was a problem here. I stated that then the stadium tax rate, hotel tax, would not bring in enough money to pay for the bond issue. I was told I was wrong. Everyone came up with different reasons, just many of them invented whole cloth, said, oh, you're wrong, you're wrong. Steve Sisolak continued to report on the monthly revenues and always put in his tweets ahead of projections, or way ahead of projections. And the song was, Zinni is wrong. But I continued and to make the points, even as a number of people were basically offering that I was, quote, just against the project, unquote, and therefore, as someone said, just making things up. Not true. Not at all. Now, toward August and September, before the horrible events of 1 October, the revenues began to dip. We had, at first, the August and September reports were both in deficit. But as monies were continued to be collected and then counted by the stadium authority staff, September went from deficit to a surplus. Only August was in deficit by $74,000. But come October and the horrible events of 1 October and the mass shooting, October and November both posted deficit numbers. That's right. So in October, we had a deficit of right at what is recorded here, $134,216. And then in November, we had an even larger deficit, about double, $365,336 less when comparing the stadium authority's projected revenues for that month versus the actual revenues. Okay? So we have the anatomy of a problem. Now with December, the problem has become more acute and obvious. So you would say, what's the so what of this? And why is it, as many of you have asked me, why is it that no one's sounding the alarm on this and they're going to go through with the bonds and everything else? The simple reason is that the bond issue is a general obligation bond issue, as I've explained before, and not a revenue bond. A general obligation bond uses the money from the general fund of the county. So that, but you would say, wait a minute, they have a dedicated stadium tax, right? Yes, they do. But this is not a revenue bond. In other words, in a revenue bond, you have the dedicated stadium tax. I used the example before of the Harris County Stadium, what is called the Texan Stadium. I use that example because it also uses a hotel tax, but that hotel tax was used for a revenue bond. The revenue bond can only be used for that dedicated source. In other words, it can only get its money from that dedicated source unless it's written into the bond document. Oh, by the way, if you run into trouble, you can go to the city and the county. That's the Raiders situation in Oakland, okay? But in Houston, it's not. That's against the law, all right? That's a revenue bond. But in the Clark County, Nevada situation, it's a general obligation bond, which means that even if there's not enough money from the revenue from the stadium tax on hotels in Clark County, on hotel rooms in Clark County, they can still use money from the general fund. They can use the full power, faith and credit and power of the county, and including its ability to levy another tax to pay it if it wants to do so. All right? But the bottom line is, right now, with these continued deficits and the quite obvious look ahead in time that these deficits are going to continue, this situation isn't getting any better. The taxpayer will wind up paying for it. Now, you would say, as others have said to me, wait a minute, Zenny, hold on a second. They can just raise the tax, right? You can go back to the Nevada Legislature and raise the tax. Well, according to Jeremy Aguero, the key staffer, he would say actually he's not the key staffer, of the Las Vegas Stadium Authority and the head of applied analysis consulting firm, and in an interview he conducted with me last week, he said it's not likely, it's unlikely that the tax would be increasing. He went on further to say that. He said the tax is what it is. In other words, you have to live with it. Wow. So in other words, the taxpayer has to live with the fact that it has to pay a portion of the stadium bond costs for the Raiders Stadium and UNLV Stadium, even though the promise was made that that would not occur, just as was the case when the Raiders returned to Oakland and participated in the construction of a PSL program that was supposed to be entirely financed by the fans, privately financed. But then in that case, guess what? When the monies came due from people buying PSLs, instead of selling the needed $84 million in that amount of PSLs, only $56 million were sold, and that shortfall caused the bond deficit that triggered dipping into the general funds of both the city of Oakland and the county of Alameda at a total of $20 million, $10 million from them, $10 million from the county. That's the first Raider deal. So now the second Raider deal looks a lot like, and it's already looking a lot like the first one, with promises that, oh, by the way, hey, the stadium tax will be paid for by visitors, by tourists. We don't have to worry about the taxpayer having to pay for anything or even getting close to that. Well, folks, that's wrong. We are here. We are here. And we will officially get there if the bonds are floated in April with no adjustment in the stadium tax. Yeah, I've heard it all before. I've heard people say, well, what about Thanksgiving? Thanksgiving is a big period of time in Clark County and Las Vegas. That'll save us. Well, it didn't. Someone else said, hey, you know what? Christmas is going to be great. You just wait for Christmas. Well, it didn't happen either. And we know that for January, the visitor count was down for New Year's Eve. We also know that we had the gigantic CES Consumer Electronics Show, which I attended, and which should contribute to a significant bump. There are other conventions going on right now in January, but will it be enough to overcome these gigantic deficits? My read on that is no. And the reason I say that is because many hotels in the area have dropped their room rates to unbelievably low, in many cases, levels. $26 for a room at a high-end hotel, and so on, okay? That hasn't happened. It hasn't hasn't happened where you have these gigantic rates all around. And not only that, you have to remember this. A number of people have rewards cards, which they can then use to obtain room deals. In some cases, get rooms for free in Las Vegas during conventions like CES and others. The question is, how many people are using those reward cards right now in Vegas to further hammer down their total payments on rooms? This detail, this minutia that we're talking about, all impacts the ability to collect sufficient revenues to retire a bond. But let's not only think about the bond issue, let's think about the Las Vegas Stadium Authority itself. According to Las Vegas Stadium Authority budget, for fiscal year 2018, it projected $49,900,000 in revenues from the stadium tax. Okay? Averaged out on a monthly basis, that's just over $4.1 million. But the true average collection of stadium tax revenues per month is not at $4.1 million at all. It is at $3,825,915. It is at deficit. And for the last reporting period, there was only a 7% difference between total revenues, all right, total revenues, between total revenues collected to date and budgeted. The difference between approximately being 35 million to 37 million. That difference is only about 7%, and that was before the December estimates were just reported. So if we look at the average expected monthly revenue from stadium tax versus what we're actually getting in reality, this next reporting period should show, if not a deficit for the first time in total, then something very, very close. Oh, and then let's not forget this. The Stadium Authority has to take $2 million out of that for its own purposes, which means, you're at a position where you have to turn around and say, what are we going to do to fix this? What are we going to do to fix this? Because if you take the $2 million out right now, with respect to the reported November estimates, they're only $435,000 ahead in terms of actual versus budget. Okay? Then if you bring in this new estimate of 2.6 million and add that, the question is what their actual is going to be. And if it's a deficit, then the amount of money that they're going to take out to pay for staffing costs and everything else, that's going to further drive them into a deficit or near deficit situation. When I say near deficit, I mean, maybe 10,000 ahead, 20,000 ahead. That's it. Considering that the total approved budget was $64 million, to be that much ahead in revenues over expenses, just $20,000, there's no contingency there, folks. Okay, that spells trouble, because then you have to start asking the question, hey, what's January going to look like? And then what's February going to look like? And then what is March going to look like? Maybe March will get the Stadium Authority back to 5 million, but it doesn't solve the overall problem, because when we first started collecting revenues or started watching the collection of revenues from the stadium tax, the first month in March was just over 5 million. Great. And the expectation was that it would stay there or go up, and it didn't. Instead, it started going down in fits and starts, and it continued, and it's gotten worse. Another problem I see, not talked about, because it's difficult to numerically, forensically prove easily, is the impact on Las Vegas of higher housing costs in California, driving many people out of their homes, seeking cheaper places to live, or leaving the state entirely, or in some extreme cases, becoming homeless. If you don't have that disposable income, you're not going to think about making a trip to Las Vegas. Homeless population numbers are at their highest ever since 2010. They've kicked up for the first time. That also has an impact on Las Vegas. So that's where we are in total, folks, and I'll get to your comments in brief before I close on this. But this is a problem, and it's a problem that is not new. It's something that I've warned the Clark County commissioners about, as well as the Las Vegas City Council in an email. And I've contended from the start that the stadium tax, which originally in the malls was at 1%, and been lowered to 0.7%, should have been not only left at 1%, but increased to 1.4%. Increased to 1.4%. I made that argument a number of times, and I was told, oh, there's no problem. There is a problem. There is a problem. And so again, the question is, what does this mean regarding the future of the stadium? Clark County Board of Commissioners have to make a decision on whether to go forward with the stadium project given this situation. I've said it before and I'll say it again. No one wants to be the boogie person. No one wants to be the person that says, oh, hey, you know what? We're going to take away the goose that we think is going to lay the golden egg, the Raiders Stadium, because of this affordability problem, this taxation affordability problem. If they turn around and say, we'll increase the tax, then they have to deal with the complaint that they're spending money on guns, sports, but not butter, education. Remember, the hotel tax in Clark County normally goes to fund education. And we're in a situation where for the second straight year, the Nevada education system was ranked the worst in the country. So that's how all this looks right now. All right? So I want to give you that report. And if you were watching this and you have some buffering issues, the final video will get better, or should. It really should. And I'll also make a follow-up, not a live stream, but a standard video as well. Thank you, and stay tuned, and please subscribe to Zenny62 on YouTube.